Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order a special emergency meeting of the Board of Supervisors at 5:30 on Monday, April the 6th, 2020. A few announcements. A state of emergency and disaster is in effect. This meeting is being held as an emergency by electronic means pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3708.2, paragraph A, section 3, and section 4 of the Rockbridge County Electronic Participation in Meetings Policies. All members of the board are participating electronically from a remote location due to the threats posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. The purpose of this meeting is to address the emergency, namely, consider the adoption of the continuity of government ordinance. The public may view this meeting live on YouTube by clicking on video on the board docs agenda. We'll have a presentation by Vicki.
Good. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, this emergency meeting is to consider the continuity of government ordinance that I presented to you in draft at the last board meeting. The purpose of this ordinance is to allow for real-time electronic meetings without the physical presence of a quorum of the board. It establishes procedures that assure public access by electronic means while observing safety guidelines and directives, suspends deadlines and permits postponement of non-emergency public hearings and action items, and encourages towns within the county to adopt a similar ordinance. The ordinance specifically provides that failure to meet deadlines shall not constitute a default violation, approval, recommendation, or otherwise, but all public entities, officers, and employees are encouraged to take such action as is practical and appropriate to meet those deadlines. All other local and regional bodies may rely on this action to alter their meetings as needed to conduct government business during the emergency in accordance with these procedures. And that this ordinance as well, if adopted, as well as a supporting resolution, will be distributed to the various boards, commissions, county agencies tomorrow. The proposed ordinance is to be effective for a period of 60 days, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Ms. Huff, I have
Yes,
one. Our planning district commission is also trying to figure out how to handle the types of meetings we now face ourselves, the situation we face ourselves in. And if I know it's not exactly pursuant to this, but if I assume this one would cover, I believe Sam and I are the representatives there. Would that cover us in our roles?
I think it would, but the Planning District Commission is created by statute, I believe, and so it should fall under the state's provisions for electronic meetings.
Which, so this would be irrelevant to that. It is what you're saying. In other words, they should already have their own, regardless of what Sam and I have done.
That's correct. But I believe if all of the, a possible alternative could be that if all of the localities that participate in and that are a part of this planning district commission, that then the PDC could rely on those from each of its localities to conduct its meetings.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Is there a motion to adopt the ordinance?
So moved.
A motion, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, any further discussion? Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Ms. Ayers,
yes,
Mr. Day,
yes,
and the chair votes yes. Thank you all. At this time, I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Supervisors at 5:35 on April 6th, 2020. This meeting is being held by electronic means pursuant to the continuity of government ordinance just adopted and to address matters of importance in the county government, but not directly related to the emergency itself. The COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe to assemble in a quorum of the board in the meeting room. All members of the board are participating from remote locations through real-time electronic means, namely Zoom. None are physically present in the board meeting room, but staff will be presenting from the board meeting room. Advance notice of at least 3 days has been provided to advise the public of the electronic meeting and the ability to view the meeting through YouTube, assessed from board docs. The county administrator will receive any citizen comments in writing by mail, email, or Dropbox and present it to the board at its April 13 meeting. One addition to the agenda, Ms. Deborah Woodcock in the Ross Road area of the county has submitted an issue to the board concerning barking dogs in her area. The county administrator had provided this to the board, and her comments will be reflected in the minutes of this meeting for the record. Mr. Suter?
Yep. Got one more item of business for Ms. Huffman.
Chairman, members of the board, this item is consideration of a resolution to extend the due date for the first half of real estate taxes from June 5th, 2020 to June 22nd, 2020. This recommendation is being made by the County Finance Committee, extending the deadline in order to allow additional time to evaluate the expected loss of revenue due to the current emergency situation and consideration of the necessary tax rate to be set for the 2020 real estate taxes. In addition, it's expected that the state is at this time reevaluating the state budget, which would impact the county budget. Therefore, the committee has recommended an extension to June 22nd for the deadline for payment. This is authorized by Virginia Code Section 58.1, 3916. And the proposed resolution is included on your agenda for adoption if you're in agreement with this proposal. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Just let the board know that Commissioner of Revenue David Whitesell and Treasurer Betty Travato are in the audience today, in case there are any questions.
All right, there's no questions. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Do I have a second?
second,
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Ms. Ayers,
yes,
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Day,
yes,
and the chair votes yes. Thank you all. Mr. Suter?
Thank you.
Ready for the budget matter?
Yes, sir.
Okay, as you all know, we entered this budget process this year knowing that we would have significant challenges, and this is prior to the COVID-19 issue. Tonight, I'll give a brief overview of where we started with the budget and what steps have been taken by the Finance Committee, staff, and the board since that time. And then Mr. Bolster will provide an overview of the Finance Committee's current recommendations. So in January, we received all budget requests and calculated expected revenues, and we found ourselves with a gap as reported to the board between revenue and requested expenditures of more than 3.1 million. At a scheduled budget meeting on February 27th, staff presented an initial review of the FY 2021 draft budget and overall funding position of the board to the Board of Supervisors. At that time, planned expenditures exceeded anticipated revenues by $1,431,572. Additional adjustments were made, and on March 9th, staff provided the board with an update which took the expenditure over revenue gap to a little bit up to 1.437538 million. At its scheduled budget meeting on March 23rd, the board received a staff and finance committee update detailing additional challenges which developed since the March 9th meeting. The largest challenge was in the form of the increased requests from the school division as a result of new information from the Commonwealth. Thus, on March 23rd, the gap had grown to 1.639592. Then, as we all know, the COVID public health threat reared its head, and we suddenly needed to try to predict downward revenue impacts in the FY 21 budget and do further adjustments. And Mr. Bolster will go over the revenue reductions in a minute. Further, we took action to help mitigate anticipated revenue or anticipated impacts on the current year revenue losses. These included a hiring freeze and spending freezes for any discretionary items or services and capital projects. The Finance Committee has met on 3 occasions since March 23rd, the last of which was on Saturday. We reviewed multiple scenarios in an effort to reach a balanced budget. At this point, we still don't know what the additional impacts will be coming down from the Commonwealth, and we don't expect to know until the General Assembly reconvenes during the last week of April. At this point, I'd ask if the Finance Committee has any additional comments at this time, and if you do, please share, and if not, Mr. Bolster can go through the revised recommendation from the Finance Committee. I'd be happy to take any questions. Bolster.
Thank you, Mr. Suter. Good evening, Chairman and members of the board. If you pull up your board docs packet, I'll read through the agenda report that I've provided. So as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic's impact over the past month, the Finance Committee is modifying the previously adopted FY21 budget schedule to align with the General Assembly reconvening on April 22nd. While at the time, the goal was to also meet the potential extension of the first half real estate tax due date, which has now been approved for June 22nd. It is expected that adjustments on the state budget, which was previously approved by the General Assembly back on March 12th, will occur as certain previously anticipated revenues will not meet forecasts. The following that I've provided in the agenda report represents the proposed changes to the budget schedule for FY21. So the first thing is tonight's meeting. So initially this was supposed to be the date when staff presented a request to advertise the FY21 budget. At this point, we are requesting simply to do a budget update. We are asking that the advertisement for the FY21 draft budget be moved to April 27th, which is a Monday. It is anticipated that if this is approved, advertising would take place on April 29th and May 6th in the News Gazette. Part of that advertisement would include an advertisement of the public hearing, which is proposed for Monday, May 11th. This is at a regularly scheduled board meeting. May 18th, which is a Monday, the Finance Committee is recommending that this be the date of budget adoption for FY21. With that, I'd just like to pause to see if there's any questions. I'm not requesting a roll call vote since we historically don't do that once the budget schedule has been adopted. But if there's any concern about this proposed change, input on that. If not, I'm requesting just affirmation that we can make these changes moving forward.
If I may, I think we have affirmation. As we touched on, I'd like the other board members to know that the challenges that presents to the treasurer and the commissioner, and we want to take what opportunities we can to in effect speed it back up when we can, if those opportunities present themselves. So we thank them for working with us and hope to get it done in a timely manner.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Steve.
Okay. Right now it shows it's at 27.
If I may, though, the reason we're doing this is because we won't know from the state, correct, until the end of April. So I'm not sure how we can speed it, but can we? Is there an opportunity to? I'm not sure there is.
I'm not either, but if that information were to come sooner, possibly, or we're able to react quickly and expediently to that, we may have a little bit of adjustment.
With that, it sounds like we've got our marching orders to move ahead on the adjusted budget schedule.
Sure.
With that, I'll transition to a review of the budget. So at this point, I am going to share the screen. And so what I'll do is I will read through the changes that we've made, and I'll highlight the pages that these changes are on. And if there's any questions as we move through the document, please don't hesitate to chime in. So the first thing we'll do is start on page 3. And so what the Finance Committee is proposing to the board is a 1 cent increase to the real estate tax rate. And so that would move it from 73 cents per $100 of assessed value to 74. It is estimated that this will generate $279,850 in additional revenue that was not previously incorporated into the budget. In addition, on the same page, you'll see that there is an increase to the personal property anticipated revenue. And what that incorporates is a proposed change from $4.25 per $100 of assessed value to $4.50. This would also involve an adjustment on the PPTRA rate, moving it down from 40% to 37%. And so that is anticipated to generate an additional $637,059 in additional revenue for personal property. The next section has to do with adjusting down some anticipated revenues. So I'll transition to and so the Finance Committee initially, well, let me backtrack. It was initially presented at the March 23rd meeting, consideration for revenues dropping in the local sales and use tax category by 10%. And after a series of meetings this past week, it was recommended that we reduce those by 30%. And so what that does on the 1% sales tax is it actually generates a reduction of $810,000. In addition, on the meals tax, there was some consideration about the opportunity to bring before the board an increase of the meals tax rate from 4% to 6%. And so we have made that adjustment. And as a result, that went up to $2,270,000. And then we did a reduction of 30%, and that dropped off $681,000. And what you see in the budget, the draft budget, is anticipated revenue of $1,598,000. You can see it's up $79,000 based on the FY 2020 anticipated budget. And then lastly, for lodging, we just reduced those all by 30%. And so that's a combined amount of initially $1,662,500. And so that's down almost $500,000 to $1,163,750 in combined lodging receipts. We also made an adjustment to the business professional occupation license tax, and that's also on page 5. In that case, it was initially up from $880,000 to $900,000. Myself and Mr. White spoke over the past week, and our recommendation to the Finance Committee, which is in this budget, this draft budget, was to reduce that by 10%. And so that's now listed at $810,000. Transition to page 7. This one was the telecom fees, and we basically made an adjustment from 12 down to 6 just based on the historical data for the year. You can see that I've collected $1,000 in telecom fees, and we had actually projected 12,000, and so we've made a downward adjustment of 50%. Next, I'll transition to page 8, and this reflects the changes on the Parks and Rec fees. Some of them are related to Lake Robertson, and then one's related to the Fairfield Pool. And so what we did there was a reduction of 30%. And even though it's difficult to know how long this pandemic is going to last, for this exercise, we did a scenario where the pools and all the campground did not open until August 1st. Let's go ahead and transition down to page 9. And you'll see at the top, we made an adjustment on the school board transportation and school board other. The top one is linked primarily to buses, and the other is related to all their other vehicles. And so we made an adjustment down of 10%, and that's primarily related to anticipated fuels costs remaining low through the majority of FY 21. Let's go ahead and go down to the page 10.
Steve, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
On that, on the school's transportation, is that fuel or is that maintenance that our county garage performs?
That is both. It's listed in both of those lines. The top one where it says transportation is the fuel and the maintenance on buses, while the one that's listed as other is for their other vehicles outside of the buses.
Well, why would maintenance be less?
Well, Ms. Ayers, we didn't make an adjustment based on repairs. It was primarily based on anticipated lower fuel costs in FY.
Okay.
Okay, so page 10. These are related to Parks and Recreation. These are concessions linked to buying some candy bars, sodas at the pools. And so we zeroed out Fairfield, and we also made a reduction on Lake Robertson And again, that was about a 30% reduction for Lake Robertson concession fees. So that highlights the adjustments on revenues that the Finance Committee is presenting to the board. I will transition now to page 19, which is the category linked to transfers.
Steve, one other question for you. There was some information sent to us recently. I think you touched on it with the meals tax. There were some other taxes that the state was granting us authority to levy or change. Did we do anything with those other taxes?
See, I believe the admissions tax is effective, if the board moves on it, is July 1st, 2021, which is FY 2022. And then Mr. Suter, I'm trying to remember what the other one was.
The other one was a cigarette tax, and that has the same implication. You couldn't, you could certainly implement it, and I have spoken.
Sorry.
I have spoken with the city managers, and they're also floating that idea as well. Right now, neither one of the cities have a cigarette tax, even though they could. And the county just became eligible this year, as long as the law stays in effect. But it wouldn't be able to be implemented and effective until July 1, 2021, as Mr. Bolster said. Am I correct in my? I've checked with Ms. Huffman. I'm correct. Yes.
All right, this is Steve Bolster again. So I'm going to transition down to page 19. Again, this is the section that's linked to transfers from reserves, whether it's restricted accounts or unassigned. And so the Finance Committee's recommendation is threefold underneath the transfer from unencumbered reserves. So the first one is for the board to consider bridging the revenue gap that we're anticipating for FY21 with $433,938 in unassigned reserves. The second point or part of it is to fund $18,400 to source the one-time purchase in the registrar's budget. As you know, there's an update that's needed for the poll books, as these are not going to be supported after December 31st, 2020. And so we consider this an unfunded state mandate. And so in general, it's considered a one-time purchase. And so the recommendation is to use, again, $18,400 to fund that upgrade. And then lastly, Tourism Director, Executive Director Gene Clark, spoken to County Administrator Spencer about making an adjustment in light of what's happening with meals and sales and occupancy tax to offer. Oh, Mr. Suter wants to speak to that. Do you want to?
Okay, I can speak to that. In the Finance Committee on Saturday, we discussed a couple different options that are scenarios at this time, because the Tourism Board needs to determine what they would like to offer up. But there were two scenarios. One scenario was that the Tourism Board basically gives a forgiveness of 10% through multiple quarters from this quarter, at least 4 quarters from now, so at least a total of 4 quarters. And the second scenario that was a potential is just foregoing the last quarter payment this year, understanding that we're not bringing in any revenues. And our payments are based on last year. So obviously we're not bringing in the revenues, but our payments are based on the collections from last year. So it remains to be seen. The Finance Committee preferred that we use the scenario which Mr. Bolster is saying, no payment in the last quarter. obviously the tourism board will have to talk about this as well. So I just wanted to offer that clarification, but right now we've got that scenario plugged into the budget.
All right, thank you, Mr. Suter. And so with that, we presume that if that does go through, that 113,492 would not be expended in the fourth quarter of FY 2020. And so the recommendation or the suggestion is to basically set aside that budget savings from FY 2020 to source and support the FY 21 tourism calculation, which is a contribution of $465,533 in FY 21. So all of those changes are what's reflected in the draft FY 21 budget. I'll pause to see if there's any other additional questions linked to revenues. Okay, with that, I'm going to transition to changes linked to the expenditure side. So I'm going to transition down to page 42. And this is in the Board of Supervisors budget. You can see in line item 3001 for professional services. Finance Committee's request is to add that back into the budget. It was previously removed in a presentation on the 23rd under exercise scenario number 1. In addition, the next change, it actually covers a series of pages linked to law enforcement. So this would be seen on pages 35, 30, 40, and 46. And so what we have added back in is basically 50% of Sheriff Steve Funkhauser's request for years of service funding within the law enforcement budgets. And so that accounts for $19,000 additional expenditures. Okay, with that, I'm going to transition down to page 58, which is Parks and Recreation. This goes back to that point that was mentioned earlier about we did a presumption that the campground would not be operating until August 1st. And as a result, if you look at budget line 1141, which is part-time wages, you'll see that is down 20,000 based on our estimate. And some of that was confirmed with some communication with Mr. Wayne Nicely. Some other information that is reflected on a series of pages that I'm not going to drill down into, but pages 54, 55, 56, 57, 59, 60, and 63. That is where the budget for nonprofit contributions are listed. What the Finance Committee did is we did a 10% reduction on the FY 2020 approved amount, and generated budget savings of $35,177. In addition, across the general fund budget, we also did a 2% reduction on non-personnel budget lines. And we did a reduction on travel and training at 50%. And except for the law enforcement budgets, we kept those as requested. Then, as I mentioned earlier, we reduced the fuel lines by 10%. So those three actions, the 2%, the 50%, and then the 10% generated around $157,200 in budget savings. And then the last couple items that I'll I'll discuss if we go down to page 66. And at the very top, you'll see the revenue sharing payment that is for the city of Lexington. And so with those adjustments on the non-property, we're talking sales tax, the meals tax, the occupancy tax, and so forth. I went back into it and made the adjustment for the revenue sharing payment. That's now listed at $1,880,642. So you'll see that it's in the budget, it's down $47,358. But from what it was previously at not $1,969,250, it's actually down $88,608. And then the last thing I'll mention is changes listed on page 67 towards the bottom under transfers and reserves. And so the Finance Committee, looking at the very top line under 99010, it's line 6500, transfer to school fund debt. The recommendation of the Finance Committee is to fund the HVAC replacement at Central and Fairfield beginning in FY 2022. And so that was previously plugged in at an estimated financing debt service payment of $238,370. And then lastly, right below that in budget line 6501, transfer to school for operations, that's now adjusted down to $14,782,640. And what that represents is an increase of $342,930. And so what that includes is mandated items that are reflected in VRS, life insurance, health credit, and so forth. What is not included in this request or in this draft budget is the projected loss of state revenue that was communicated as $208,656. And then also it does not include the 2% increase that was anticipated or was actually approved in the March 12th budget. There's been a local cost of $492,529. So with that, I'm here and Mr. Suter's here to answer any kind of additional questions that the board may have of staff. We still have a few weeks to go or a couple of weeks to go before we get to April 27th. And so if there's any additional feedback, comments, we are asking the board to speak to Dr. Lyons and Mr. Lewis with the Finance Committee to provide us any, again, feedbacks, any kind of restructuring on the proposed draft budget. There's one piece that we just got this afternoon that I have forgotten to communicate. So if you guys would be patient with me and go back up to the Parks and Rec budget.
Steve, while you're locating that page, I just want to say I think it's important to note that air conditioner financing, that's the school's suggestion to the Finance Committee more so than the Finance Committee doing that unilaterally. Just to, we're working with that, the timing of that.
Okay, so if you go to page 57, the very top line is 3005. It's the payment under the joint services agreement for railroad. I think it was about 2:30. We got word that railroad staff had gone back to their FY21 budget and are working to make some reductions. And we don't officially have it, but it's been communicated that the reduction for the county's cost share is going to be $11,190. So instead of $240,719, it is anticipated that this will now be $229,529. So presuming we put that in there, right now we're actually revenues would exceed expenditures by that amount, $11,100. Prior to that news, we had gotten to a balanced budget. So incorporating cuts in revenue, cuts in expenditures, consideration of a real estate tax increase and an increase to personal property to include a reduction on the PPTRA rate.
Steve, on page 57, where I know we did a 10% reduction to other nonprofits. How is Lime Kim, line 5603, how is that considered? I see there's no reduction there.
That's a great question. So that is tied to a VCA grant. And so until we get word that the grant money is being reduced, we're going to keep that at 9,000. So what that represents is 4,500 coming in from the state and 4,500 supported by the county. So again, if that goes down to say 4,000, then we would have to make that adjustment on that budget. At this point, we don't have that information.
Okay. The only other item that I wanted to speak to was on page 67, line item 6501, the $342,000 increase for schools operation. That, I understand that's for the mandated cost. I don't understand why we're not including the loss in state revenue of $208,000. They're going to have to cut their budget for that. And the other piece that I think we all need to be aware of is if they don't give a raise, which, that's up to them based off of the amount of money we say we're able to contribute to them. In their budget right now, it's approximately $200,000 that is tied to giving that raise. So it's just not that we don't contribute our $500,000. That's one piece of it. If we don't do that and they're not able to give a raise, they'll lose an additional $200,000 from their state aid, which would mean they would need to cut their budget by approximately $408,000. And I realize that, we're hoping that the state makes some changes to that money tied to a raise. And, but I think we should budget off of right now what we know versus what we hope happens. And the realistic option is the state could remove that string, but could also remove that money from their budget, because it's likely that the state at this point is not going to hit their revenue targets. So, down the road when we are having to figure our budget, it could change based off of the state aid to the schools as well as state aid to the county.
And I think those are good points. I think now is more of a time of pause so that we can see exactly what is going to happen. I think a lot of information will come out. I've listened to the state superintendent twice a week for the last 3 weeks. I listened to the governor when he joined the conversation last week. 200,000 is from the state for raises. And if they don't give raises, they won't get that 200,000. But that 200,000 won't be necessary in the budget because they're not giving a raise. I think what's important now is exactly what we can tax our citizens with. 200,000 is a lot of money, but 492 is a lot more. So that would mean either another almost 2 cents on the tax rate, or if we go to our reserves. But remember, when you go to the reserves, that puts you in the hole the following year. So if you did that, it would be another 492 just to get out of the hole next year on those raises. Plus, they got a 2% in for the following year. So we'd be starting out, if we use reserves, over 900,000 in the hole as we look forward to next year's budget.
And I'm not advocating for a raise or
No.
anything like that. I'm just stating that the $200,000 that is listed on their budget as state aid actually came from another line item in their existing budget. So if they lose that, their existing budget is going down an additional $200,000. I just want to make sure that all the supervisors are aware that it's not 208,000 that they'll have to come up with. It'll be 408.
Right. And the other thing, this gives us some time for the school. And we've conveyed this to go back through their budget, kind of like line by line, like we've been doing for the last 2 weekends, to look and see if there's any possible savings and to figure out their, which is now a March 13th ADM. So we can see exactly what the loss in revenues will be. And so we hope to hear from that pretty soon too.
With that, I don't have any additional comments for this agenda item. Just appreciate the flexibility that the Finance Committee has had to meet over the last 2 Saturdays to help us get to the goal of getting to a balanced budget. So I don't know if Mr. Suter has any final comments at all.
I didn't have any comments planned, but I do appreciate the Finance Committee and I appreciate the board taking the time to share back with the Finance Committee your thoughts. This is an enormously significant challenge. It has been from the start, and the recent health emergency has made it even more so. And early on, you know, if you just put it in pennies on the tax rate, we were up in the 8-cent range if the board was going to fund everything that was requested looking at the revenues. Obviously, that can't happen. It just can't happen. So with the Finance Committee has gotten to the point where they're trying to use some fund balance. That's what the rainy day fund is for, with the understanding that when you use fund balance, as Dr. Lyons said, you start off in the hole the next year, and there's got to be a plan to make that back up at some point. And then just to trying to balance out any increases to citizens. And again, this is a board decision. Look forward to you all having dialogue one-on-one over the next week or so, and providing it back to the Finance Committee to give staff our marching orders. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions, concerns? If not, can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Day,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Ms. Natters,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Thank you all. Appreciate all our help from our tech support. Hopefully we'll get better at this electronic meeting, and even more so that we won't have to do it for more than a couple more months. We stand adjourned.
Thank you.